100 spent hens, rescued from a free-range egg facility, began their lives at Peaceful Prairie Sanctuary the day they were scheduled for slaughter. When educating yourself or informing others about the horrors of factory farming, please remember these faces, and please remember that free-range farming is not a humane alternative. From the victim's perspective, they are exactly the same thing. These are the faces of free-range farming. All of these hens had been debeaked with no anesthetic, a painful procedure that involves cutting through bone, cartilage, and soft tissue. All of them arrived with calcium-depleted bones and severe feather loss that left their bodies covered in bruises and abrasions. All of them were depleted and debilitated by the unnaturally high rate of egg production and by repeated cycles of forced molting, periods of up to 18 days, when they had been intentionally starved to shock their bodies into another laying cycle. All of them came from hatcheries where all of their brothers had been killed in infancy simply because, as roosters, they could not lay eggs. At 18 months of age, a fraction of a chicken's lifespan, these hens were considered spent, unable to produce eggs at a fast enough rate, and they were scheduled for slaughter. All 100 of them bore the physical and psychological scars of an entire young life spent in the crowded confines of a sunless, windowless, ammonia-filled cement shed. Even after weeks of sanctuary life, many are still in a constant state of terror, still panicking at the drop of a leaf, still cowering at the smallest noise as though hit by a physical blow to the body. Some cope by huddling and staying close together. Others try to cope by making themselves invisible, trying to hide and escape the perceived danger the best they can, squeezing themselves in the nearest, smallest nook, even if the space is barely large enough to mask their faces. Some, like this young hen, arrived completely defeated. She had given up. She just stood motionless in the same spot for hours, unable or unwilling to eat or drink, but still laying eggs, even when she barely had enough energy to sustain her own life. To this day, some still display stereotypic neurotic behaviors, such as head bobbing or compulsive feather pecking, or air pecking, pecking at unseen imaginary targets for hours, the vestiges of the deprived environment they endured since infancy. Others are still too depressed and withdrawn to venture out, even after weeks of free life and genuine care. To this day, they keep themselves tucked in an out-of-the-way corner, watching the great, big, happening world outdoors from the inside of the barn. These are the faces of free-range farming. And as most Peaceful Prairie residents can testify by their very presence as former victims of small family farms, there is no such thing as humane farming on any scale. All farming involves routine and severe physical and psychological abuse. Painful mutilations like debeaking, detowing, tooth scraping, tail docking, dehorning, and castration are the norm in all farms, regardless of size and type. So is confinement, social deprivation, the serial rape euphemistically known as artificial insemination, and the cruel separation of mother and child. And ultimately, all farmed animals, whether used for eggs, milk, or flesh, are violently packed in trucks and forced to endure a horrifying slaughter. All these are routine farming practices, and all of the Peaceful Prairie residents were once the victims of it. Please remember their faces, and please remember that, ultimately, the value of a sentient life is not measured in its utility to others, but in its immense, irreplaceable value to the being whose life it is.